Okay, well, we're back again. Now, you've mastered the Marshmallow Challenge, and you have thought about Bloom. And now, what the rest of the module is about is to think about how the two can go together. There's different examples on this page, as you can see. The Marshmallow Challenge by a group of younger kids, a group of high school students attempting the challenge, and adults attempting the challenge. This challenge has been performed with many, many individuals, many types of individuals, whether they be school-age kids or adults, engineers, MBA types, all kinds of different people at conferences or workshops or in school programs have attempted the Spaghetti Tower Challenge or the Marshmallow Challenge. And so watch each of these videos. They're interesting. They're not very long. But it's interesting, now that you've completed your challenge, to think about how did we perform as a group during that phase of the challenge, or how did we as a group come to make decisions? On this page, Peter Skillman and we also have Tom Wujek are going to discuss the challenge more from an academic perspective. Peter is pretty short, not a very long presentation, and Tom is a little bit longer. These were both highlighted at recent TED Talks. And what I want you to take away from this is the need to prototype, or the idea of experimenting with your project, your challenge, in order to determine what's going to happen, in order to determine how are we going to be good at this. But one of the key assumptions here is that something might go wrong if we didn't think about it before, and that's this notion of rapid prototyping, or the idea of getting the marshmallow on the tower before the last possible second. And that's oftentimes a recipe for disaster. I won't give away a lot more than that, because for some of you, you haven't attempted your challenge here. But I share these with you. These videos are available on the website. Typically in class, when I taught this, I would hold back sharing any information. You would just walk into class, sit down, and be presented with the challenge. That way, everything is kind of new and novel to you, and you haven't had time to research or to think about what is this challenge about. But I'm going to leave it with you, because I think that even with as much knowledge as you want, when you sit down and actually do the challenge, you'll be presented with a test of your knowledge and abilities, and getting that macaroni, that spaghetti noodle, to do what you want it, and to have the marshmallow successfully placed at the top. So good luck, best of luck with taking your project to the next level. So how does this relate to Bloom? Bloom as a person, this idea was originally developed by Benjamin Bloom in 1956. His theory on educational objectives has been termed Bloom's taxonomy. And with a taxonomy, it allows us to catalog or to categorize learning, in this case, learning as a function of progressive levels. And the idea of progressive levels means that you move up in a hierarchy. And so Bloom proposed this taxonomy as a way of understanding how we learn. And how we learn occurs at all ages. It isn't something that we turn off and no longer utilize as we get older. It's not something that we have to be waiting for a while to get going with. It's from day one. We learn at a very early age, and we never stop learning. But that doesn't mean that we all get to the same level. That doesn't mean we all get to the same degree of success. There are many different types of individuals out there, some of whom are experts, some of whom are not so good at making decisions or at applying their learning. And so it's all across the board. Education and learning is not strictly correlated with IQ or how smart you are. It's a function of what have you learned and how have you put together what you've learned. Basically, Bloom was saying that as adults or as individuals, we're learning from a lower order thinking skill, progressing up through a higher order thinking skill. Knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. You build upon what comes before. Now, in 2001, Loren Anderson and a work of others modified Bloom's taxonomy to slightly rearrange and to change the part of speech that we're using here. We went from nouns to what's called gerunds. And the taxonomy became remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I like this revised taxonomy a little better. Personally, I like to think of creating as a really cool thing to do. And so I like the modified taxonomy. And so each level of Bloom is moving up in the hierarchy. And remember in your assignment relative to the write-up, I said there are three phrases that kind of are critical underpinnings to Bloom. Before you can understand a concept or fact, you must remember it. Let's just pause with that for a second. Before you can understand a concept, you must remember it. My gosh, we have to remember a lot of things in life. We have to remember 1 + 1 = 2. We have to remember how arithmetic problems are solved, how spelling issues are resolved, I before E except after C. Simple little rules are necessary to help guide us through this process called learning. And so they're all around us. Look both ways before you cross the street in terms of pedestrian safety. Don't drive and be a distracted driver. There's a lot of things we have to remember before we can understand the concept. To apply a concept, you must understand it first. So with understanding, we're able to apply a concept, meaning I can take what I've learned and I can apply it in a new situation. That's what's important here. Apply it in a new situation. Some unique occurrence of facts have come together and I can apply what I've learned. I can take what I know about building a fire and I can build a fire in a new location at a new place and time. Third statement, to evaluate a process, you must have analyzed it. So to evaluate places a judgment on your activity. I'm going to judge whether two items, two processes are equal, whether one is better than another. But in order to do that, I need to analyze it. I need to compare what's going on. I need to look at what's going on, and then I need to make a decision, draw an inference on whether one is better than the other, whether they are both equal, or whether I need more information. That could very well be a possibility. They look pretty similar going into the final round of judging, but there's something about that one technique that I think pulls it over the top. Now, with Bloom, we have these levels of learning. Now, associated with each level of learning, so in this case, creating, there are key verbs. And the thing about Bloom is that verbs help drive the conversation. In the creating level of understanding, we use verbs like designing, constructing, planning, producing, inventing, devising, or making. Those verbs are different types of speech compared to the remembering level, where we have recognize, list, describe, identify, retrieve, name, locate, or find. They're good verbs, but they imply this differing level of understanding. And so when I ask a person to relate what there is about Bloom at the remembering level to their work, then I might have them, I might ask a question, can you name the plants that you work with? Can you name the crops that you work with? Can you name the parts of a machine that you work with? Can you identify or name or list or describe? After that, we move up the ladder a little bit to interpret, summarize, infer. We move up the ladder. See, so what we're doing is we're looking at these building steps and we're using the verbs to operationalize or to put into practice how we've learned those topics. Now, this page has a set of links here. And so create, evaluate, analyze, apply, understand, remember. We also have, in this case, a similar Bloom's taxonomy, but now we have slightly different phrases. Can the student, at the top level, can the student create a new product or point of view? And verbs like assemble, construct, create, design, develop, formulate, write. So if I said you are in charge of preparing a plan, that is very much like the highest level of Bloom. If I said you're in charge of developing a blueprint, you're in charge of creating a business plan, you're in charge of creating a marketing plan, you're in charge of designing creating a planting design. Those are all at the creating level. Where down below at remembering, can the student recall or remember the information? And therefore, verbs like define, duplicate, list, memorize, recall, repeat, state. So this chart, this figure right here, is done up a little bit differently than the previous one, but they're both going after similar things. It's a challenge. Can you see a possible solution to our safety problem that we're experiencing on the assembly line? How would you devise your own way to come up with a perennial garden? There are more than one way to solve this problem. Oftentimes there is. So you see how this is working out here in terms of the question stems. Now, evaluating, justifying a decision or course of action. The common verbs, checking, hypothesizing, critiquing, experimenting, judging. The single word of creating, evaluating, analyze, or applying, understanding, remembering, they're useful, but there's so many more powerful verbs at work here in Bloom that creating all by itself is relevant. But the process verbs of arrange, assemble, combine, compose, construct, create is there. Design, develop, divide. You see, there's a lot more powerful verbs at work here than just the single verb of creating. It's a good verb, but there's so many more going on in here. So calculate. If I was to ask a question, how would you calculate the square root of a number? How would you categorize? You see, those are questions that typically we would ask during an interview, depending on the nature of the job requirements, of course, that would cause us to have to explain how we are able to master this learning topic. And so in this case, these 6 rows are equal in layout down to remembering. But it's just a little more sophisticated table that gives us something to look at. Now, applying Bloom. And so Bloom is an important concept. You don't hear a lot about it in college courses unless you're an education major, and then you will hear a lot about it. And so this little video here in terms of the playing a drum at the start of a Bloom's taxonomy course, Bloom's taxonomy lesson here. I'll include it briefly.
Bloom's taxonomy is the classification of the 6 different levels of the cognitive domain, or the thought process. The first and most basic of these levels is knowledge. This refers to defining, naming, or labeling an object. This is a drum. The next of these levels is comprehension. This refers to...
I'm going to pause there because this guy is going to get himself in trouble sooner than he expects. But the idea is applying Bloom to what is a drum and how is it used, and that's the idea. So applying Bloom in everyday learning, as I've said before, is about taking baby steps and progressing up the ladder to ever larger and larger understanding or increments, ways of looking at things. For example, learning a foreign language starts with the grammar, vocabulary, and then progresses through stories, literature, and philosophy. Now, of course, there's a lot in between, but that's what the essence of Bloom is about. There's a lot of knowledge going on in between. You didn't learn how to become a horticulturist or a agronomist or a soil scientist or a design specialist in 1 week. It took years. And the better you are, it'll continue to take more time. And so as we learn more, we keep improving our understanding. And what I've done in the class in the past is to have an assignment that is looking at how I applied what I've learned outside of class.